Mass shootings not caused by mental illness, experts say. USA Today. Detroit, after a harrowing weekend in Texas and Ohio, mass shootings left 31 people dead and dozens more injured. President Donald Trump called for more culture change to stop the glorification of violence in video games and online platforms, as an end to bigotry and hatred, and reforms to mental health laws. But his statements about mental health, referring to mass shooters as mentally ill monsters and suggesting involuntary confinement for some people with mental illness, were off the mark, said Kevin Fisher, the executive director of Michigan chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness on mental illness. He noted that there is little correlation between mental illness and violent killings. Study after study, this is in quotes, has shown us that it is simply not true. It's actually more often the reverse, he said, and that people living with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Racism, hate, white supremacy are not diagnosable mental illnesses. The glorification of violence, blah, 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 blah. That's just a little thing into the reading, but it's not actually part of the article. Arthur Evans, the CEO of the American Psychological Association, the APA, the largest professional and scientific organization of psychologists in the United States, said it's important for people to understand, and Arthur Evans is a brother, that there is a fairly weak link between mental illness and mass shootings. In a 2016 book, Gun Violence and Mental Illness, published by American Psychological Association Publishing, researchers reported that mass shootings perpetrated by people with serious mental illness account for less than 1% of all yearly gun-related homicides. In quotes, the biggest predictor of who is going to commit these crimes is violence, a history of past violence, said Evans. That is the single best predictor of who is going to act in a violent way and commit these kinds of violent acts. In addition, we know that there are other factors, stressors, alienation, disaffection, a history of domestic violence. All of those contribute to people's likelihood to act out in violent ways. Mental illness is in there, but not as strong as these other factors. Access to guns also is problematic, Evans says. If we know someone is at risk of hurting themselves or other people, you restrict their access to weapons, he said. We know it can save lives when it comes to suicide. We know that it can save lives when it comes to homicide. However, correlating mental illness directly with mass shooting doesn't work out statistically, Evans said. And let me go ahead and tell you the problem with taking away people's weapons. If you can't prove and bonify what he says, see, that's the issue. That's a contradiction. You can't say that we should take away their guns or whatever, because you have, once again, who determines this? Because there's other people who I'm sure who are all professionals who disagree with what they're hearing right now. Let me go ahead and get a picture of this Evans brother so that way you know who you're dealing with. One of these jokers that think that shaving his face makes him intelligent. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but 30% of the world's mass shootings, he said. But we don't have 30% of the world's mental illness. The facts don't bear out that way. Stop right there. How do you know that you don't have? If you can't measure, because you do know that racism, by definition, is a mental illness. They actually call it an illness. Before it was not an illness, Mr. Evans, Dr. Evans, it actually was a mental illness. For a person to be racist, they're pretty much like, on the basis of someone's skin color, they're like, you have to be mentally ill, dog. But to me, you're just evil. But I understand the prognosis and the diagnosis of how it all comes about. But anyway, let's just go ahead and keep it pushing. Fisher said that what concerns him most about the statements the president made in his Monday morning speech is that they could add stigma already associated with people living with mental illness. They could discourage rather than encourage people to seek help. For the president to make a statement like mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun, is dangerous because it further stigmatizes people with real mental illness and unfortunately continues to perpetuate the idea that people with mental illness are dangerous. Evans agreed, noting 1 in 4 people noting 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health challenge in their lifetime, and the vast majority are nonviolent. Stop right there. If people are going to experience 1 in 4 people, how do the other 3 out of the 4 not experience it, man? It's nonsense, dog. Everybody goes through traumatic shit. That's how I know that this dude Evans is bro. Want to be a white dude anyway. We're talking about conditions that are wide-ranging and affect a lot of people, he said. Many people don't reach out for help because the stigma associated with mental health challenge. And I think this kind of language can contribute to that and make it harder for people to reach out for help. It's bullshit. There is no such thing as what they're trying to say, y'all. You guys really need to understand this. Medication is not the answer, okay? They don't have the answer. The people who are so-called psychologists kill their wives, rape their children, and do all kinds of fucked up shit. So for a dude like this guy to be bumping his fucking gums, he sound like a sucker. But let me go ahead and keep it pushing. He acknowledged that in addition to mental illness, that there is hate and bigotry that is underlining some of these facts, Evans said. Even in some terms he used word concerning because it reinforces the worst stereotypes or worst notions that we have about having a mental health challenge. How is that? Since when did people ever, when I was a kid, people who were mentally ill were not the people that you had to worry about pulling guns on you. It was evil people who just were intent on doing wickedness. But let me go ahead and finish this out. Fisher agreed that more public awareness about mental health disorders is vital. I'm a very strong proponent of not only increasing access to mental health care, but also educating the public about what is really mental illness versus sometimes there are bad people who have bad intentions. Listen. There is no difference. If you do something evil, it's evil. It doesn't fucking matter what's wrong with your mind. Stigma is the leading barrier, he said. If we can change the way we look at mental illness, more people will seek the help that they need, and I think it makes us all safer. It's a scary time, he said. We need to be conscious of talking to our children and our spouses. If we're feeling anxiety about what's happening, the best thing to do is talk about it and not keep it in. No shit. Listen, let me go ahead and tell y'all something. This dude is a joke, okay? He's a fucking clown. He's a fucking clown. If I ever listen, and I mean, like, man, I had to read this shit. You know how painful that shit is? When I have to read it once and then read it again? These dudes are clowns. And these are the people that we have to contend with. Did he talk about the ERPO? No. But the ERPO, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, is exactly what he was alluding to with people having their guns taken away. I'm under an ERPO right now. I don't have any mental illnesses. I don't have any history of mental illnesses. I don't even have a fucking I have no convictions on my record. Nothing. The ERPO does not work. Y'all have been under an ERPO for over a year now. Thank you very much. This is why I'm trying to tell you guys. This shit's going to blow up in their face way worse than they ever could have imagined. And I'm going to be standing on the sidelines to slow clap for them. I guarantee it.